Welcome to the Ephesiology Podcast and our series, Archaeology Meets Missiology, the mission of God in the records of time. Today we have Michael, our resident ephesiologist, and I'm Andrew Johnson in Houston, Texas. And it is an honor today to be joined by Dr. Mark Wilson. Professor Wilson is an American scholar who is the founder and director of the Asia Minor Research Center in Antalya, Turkey. He and his wife, Dindy, have lived in Turkey since 2004, and he has written several books, including Biblical Turkey, A Guide to the Jewish and Christian Sites of Asia Minor, The Spirit Said Go, Lessons and Guidance from Paul's Journeys, and most recently with Glenn Thompson, In This Way We Came to Rome, with Paul on the Appian Way. He is a frequent presenter in biblical documentaries, including the new film, Barnabas and Paul. Dr. Wilson, thank you so much for being our guest today.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Andrew. My pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, well, this is a joy. As you know, we're doing a series of for the podcast on archaeology, and I'm so grateful that you are able to step into this and interact with us on this. Let me just take a minute, Andrew, and
oh, please,
give
yes,
some background here. Mark and I met during the COVID era. Do we talk about it as an era yet? When we were all meeting on Zoom, and I came across Mark's work on the book of Revelation as we were preparing for a course on the study of Revelation, and especially focusing on Jesus in Revelation, and was delighted to come across another scholar who would date the book of Revelation early. So that was a lot of fun, and that initiated a conversation and ultimately resulted in me getting connected with someone that Mark is very familiar with, and that's Levant Oral in Tutku tours, educational tours. And of course, we've been going now twice to Turkey with Tutku, and we're looking forward to the March trip as well, continuing some of our research on the intersection of missiology and archaeology. So, Mark, it's a delight to have you on here and to hear directly from you about all of your, well, I wish we had time to hear about all of your archaeological experiences, but just a joy to have you speak into the importance of archaeology, especially as we think about the biblical texts.
Yeah, my pleasure. Glad to be here.
Okay, so Mark, you are somebody who visits regularly the 7 churches that we see in Revelation. So which one's your favorite? What's your favorite town of all 7 that you go to? I'm totally putting you on the spot, but what would you say, like, I really enjoy going here?
I tell people who ask me that question, it's like asking me which child is my favorite. I've got basically a top 10 list in Turkey, and on that top 10 list is, I would say, 4 of the 7 churches. So
awesome.
Clearly Ephesus, Pergamum, Sardis, and the cluster there with Laodicea, Hierapolis, and Colossae. I mean, those are all fantastic, those 4.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, how do you complete the top 10?
I would put Assos there. I would put Miletus there.
Okay.
Down on the Mediterranean, I would put Patara and Myra and Andriake, their port there. And I would put Perge, right where I live here too, as a really exceptional site. So, that's probably, I think that's 10, but it's close to it.
Yeah. Honestly, it's exciting to me that you actually had a top 10 list. We're in the age of like hot takes where everybody says this is my top 10, but you ask them and they definitely don't have 10 listed. I mean, you did. You had a list, and that was wonderful.
Well, you have visited more than those 10 over the years that you've been working in Turkey. Tell us a little bit, Mark, about how you got involved on the archaeological side of what you're doing in Turkey.
Well, I go back to 1992 when I made my first visit here. I was just beginning my own doctoral study in the book of Revelation, and our church got interested in it. And if you remember those days of the 1040 window, and our church was interested in that group of nations that fell in that geographical area. And of Turkey, of course, was in that as a country that's 99.9% Muslim. So we came to Western Turkey, and I visited many of the 7 churches at that time. It was my first time out of America, and I was hooked. And so in 93, I started my doctoral study. And basically, except for a couple of years during that time, I've been back in Turkey every year until we moved here in 2004. Lived my first 2 years over here in 1994 and 95. Then when I began taught at Oral Roberts University for 4 years, I began taking student groups over here. And then the rest just kind of evolved until at one point my wife says, well, you're in Turkey so much, why don't we consider moving over there?
Oh, great.
Was that the biggest shock of your life that she suggested it? Like you didn't have to like lead the conversation, but it was like being offered to you?
Yeah. So, yeah, she had been to Turkey at that point several times and really enjoyed it there. We had good friends over here already. And so we kind of made a spy out the land trip in 2001, staying in 4 different cities during the fall of that year. And, it's more challenging for a woman to live in a Muslim country. And she came home and she says, yeah, I can do it. And so as a result of that, it took us a couple of years to get our stuff together and move over in 2004.
Wow. Wow. What a journey that you were on. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your interest in your doctoral work in the book of Revelation and the 7 churches.
Yeah, so at that time, really there was not a lot of work on Revelation. It exploded as you came into the 2000s, and I was looking at the promises to the victor sayings at the end of these, and nobody had ever written on those before. And so that was a focused area, and that really got me interested in material culture because a lot of those promises were based on archaeological, historical things. And so that began, and I've always had a long time interest in archaeology. So when we moved over to Izmir, came in contact with Turkish archaeologists, and I quickly became kind of the Christian guy that was around. So when there was conferences and symposia, I would be invited then to come and give a paper sort of on the Christian perspective of various sites. And so that's sort of how I kind of built the connections and my reputation here in the country. And so as a result of that, got favor with Turkish archaeologists and, just have gone on from there.
I want to jump in just as a quick question because it's funny, my mind was going there and then you brought it up. What have you seen is like the biggest difference between the Christian guys' take and the other archaeologists? What might you like say are some of the biggest differences that you've seen on the ground? Just that your Christian perspective, how it changes or impacts what you're seeing there.
Well, I mean, because it's such a majority Muslim culture in the public schools. Basically, little is taught about other, religions that have a history here in this country, particularly Judaism and Christianity. And even when you get into the university systems, the information there is usually sparse, sometimes inaccurate. And so, over these years, we've just gradually been trying to bring a richer and more complete perspective to that. So one of the things, of course, we encountered right away, because it's required by law that you have a Turkish tour guide over here. And so, really wonderful people, well educated. And I was invited to do a seminar for tour guides in 2001. So that was the first time. And we had the Anglican Church in Izmir full of tour guides. We must have had about 50 in there. And this is the first time anything like that has happened.
That's
and
cool.
So that was a door that's been opened. And so, I was just in Izmir last week, and some of the guys who were at that first seminar 20 plus years ago are still in the business and continue to guide and remain friends.
Wow. Wow, that's neat to see those long-term relationships.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay, so I'm starting to put dates together here. In 92, you're doing your doctoral studies in Turkey. At that time, Laodicea is hardly excavated, isn't it?
Oh, it was so funny the way we used to go into the site. There was a dirt road coming in from the south across these railroad tracks, and you had to be careful watching for trains coming by, And we drive, and the bus driver didn't like to go on this road very much. It was dusty, and of course, if it had rained, it was impossible to drive there. And you'd come up into the site and get out of the bus, and people would look around. It's like there's nothing here, There's big empty mound, and we'd walk around and take a look at the theaters that were there remaining, but everything was just ruins. And so until the excavation started in the early 2000s, Laodicea was just this huge tell.
Yeah. Wow. Kind of like Colossae now.
It is, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Just on a much larger scale, of course.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Wow. So, Mark, over these years that you've been engaged in these studies on the archaeological record, the material culture of Western Turkey, of all of Turkey, really. I mean, you've gotten around to quite a bit of places and have written extensively. I appreciate so much your volume on biblical Turkey. Turkey has been described as the world's largest museum. That's stunning to many people to think about that.
Yeah, I mean, the number of archaeological sites that are currently under excavation, and with the proliferation of universities in the provinces, and each one of those has an archaeology department. And obviously, you have students, and you begin to excavate in the sites in your province. So, as a result of that, the Turkish government has very significantly invested in archaeology as it relates to tourism. And marvelous sites, and they're continuing to find things all the time. So, and with that, of course, Turkey is called the second Holy Land. So after Israel, I mean, you have more biblical sites here in Turkey than any other country in the Eastern Mediterranean. And so for that reason, after people go to Israel, they say, where can we go next? And Turkey is right there at the top of the list.
Yeah, wow. Wow. And so with all of those archaeological sites, and we think about, of course, the book of Acts and how significant Asia Minor plays in the ministry of Paul, what would you say are some of the more remarkable things that you've learned about Christianity and those early centuries?
Well, the mobility of the apostles, I mean, it's just astounding. I remember when we drive on an air-conditioned, comfortable bus with people leaving Tarsus. We go up through the Cilician gates, and we get to Derbe and Lystra, and finally end up in Iconium 10 hours or so later. People say, oh, we're just exhausted. It's just been such a long day, And I said, just think of Paul.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're walking this distance over a week or more. No air conditioning, and making his way, and you've had the luxury of doing it on a tour bus. So it just reminded of the vast differences that are here in Turkey and Asia Minor, and especially compared to Israel, where everything is so close.
Yeah. That perspective is really telling to see those distances and to realize how much of a challenge that must have been for those early disciples as they were going from city to city.
Yeah, one of my favorite texts is in Paul at the end of his time in Ephesus. There in Acts chapter 19, he says that he's compelled by the Spirit now to leave. So he's already gotten the word from the Lord before the riot takes place. And he says, I'm going to first go to Macedonia and Achaia, and then to Jerusalem, and then I'm going to go to Rome. So, I mean, even today, you think of the travel dimensions, for doing that. I mean, and he's doing this by land and sea. So he was quite a frequent flyer, sailor, traveler in the ancient world, you know.
Sure. Yeah. Wow. Well, let me ask you. I think I could probably answer this question for you, but I would love for people to hear directly from you, or at least I might pretend to be able to answer this question. How important has it been for you in your study of the New Testament to actually see these sites?
Well, I mean, the book of Acts makes eminent sense, of course, once you're on the ground over here. And so I say when you travel around here, it's taking 2D text of scripture and suddenly it becomes 3D. And so as you're making the drive then from the coast, from Perge going up to Pisidian Antioch, you're crossing a big mountain range. You're going through river valleys, and you're realizing just the geography and the topography that's involved with the text here that just seems rather flat, as you're reading in the book of Acts. And so I think that's just a real dimension of the archaeology there. And then you go into a place like Pisidian Antioch, and you begin to see what Paul would have seen, the imperial cult temple that's there at the highest point there, and the area where they think the synagogue might have been. And so it just comes to life now that the text you read about is actually still in the archaeology of these ancient cities.
Yeah, it reminds me of what William Ramsey said, that we need to breathe the air that they breathed to really understand the significance of that area.
What's so amazing to me is, and I appreciate my colleagues who are working on text of the New Testament, but so many of them are just so text-based, and so they never get out in the field. I kind of term it ivory tower scholarship. And they're just reading what other people are writing, and they never get out there and walk the same roads and see the same things that the apostles saw. And I think that's brings a real added dimension to the writing of scholars when they do that.
Yeah.
Well, let me take Michael's question and go a level deeper. How has your faith in Christ been impacted by the sites that you have seen? How has your work in archaeology actually strengthened your trust in God?
Well, yeah. So many people say, well, archaeology proves the Bible, but I'm not trying to get it from that dimension. I mean, my faith is in Christ without archaeology. It's through the revealed word and through the witness of the Holy Spirit in my life. And for me, it's just fun to get out and see these things and show them to people and saying, hey, this is what Paul or this is what Luca is writing about here. And it's just really incredible that we can experience this and know that the book of Acts is historically makes sense. And that's still a battle that we're fighting all the time, especially when we send off articles to journals for referees, and we'll commonly get back, well, you're taking Acts so historically, in trusting this as a source. And it's like, are we still fighting this battle?
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that Roman historians, classical archaeologists, nautical archaeologists, they see Acts as a wonderful historical text. It's the biblical scholars who are the most skeptical about the historicity of Acts, and so that's what's really is quite remarkable.
Well, and that might even indicate that they haven't visited the sites to see the sites and get into the epigraphic evidence and all of these other material to pieces, and it does really illuminate, doesn't it, to see those things. What in your experience, Mark, as you've been working in Turkey for so long and involved with these archaeological sites, what have been some of the things that you look at and say, you know what, that has really helped me to bring more illumination to this particular biblical text?
Well, one of the things we do a lot here is work with roads and road transportation networks. And Turkey is very different than Israel. Israel, you can sign up and work on an archaeological site and do that. But in Turkey, it's not possible usually for foreigners. We have a few foreign excavations. The Austrians work at Ephesus. The Germans are at Pergamum. Americans are at Sardis and Gordion. But getting onto these teams to excavate is very difficult, unless you're an archaeology student. So that's just not open usually to outsiders. But nobody is particularly interested in Roman roads and transport. And so we've been able to do a lot of work following these roads and routes. And the impact of that is we've been able to influence a lot of the Bible atlases and Bible maps that often really don't depict an accurate route for these. The cartographers who are making these are sitting in an office and they connect the dots with the shortest line. And they're not really dealing with the realities of the route of a road or where a pass is, where a lake is.
Yeah.
So,
there's something in the way.
There's something in the way, exactly. So, for example, you look at every map of Paul's first journey coming in from Perga to Pisidine, they go right through the mountains. I mean, even today, on that route today, there is no Turkish highway except for minor asphalt roads that goes that way. Why? Because the Taurus Mountains are in the way. And this is why the Romans developed the Via Sebaste, which is an alternate route on a much easier route, 50% longer, but much, much easier to travel. And so, we've been writing and mapping that. And I think we're making progress now in moving the needle to a fresher appreciation of how Paul and Barnabas made that trip.
Yeah, interesting. And now is this the topic of your recent volume on Paul and Barnabas?
Well, that volume had to do with Italy. So okay. This is the work we're doing here in Turkey, and we're looking to do a companion volume to that on the Via Sebaste here. I have written an article on with Bob Wagner dealing with Paul traveling from Lystra to Derbe, under the title "Why Derbe." I've just written another article dealing with Paul in villages along the Via Sebaste, dealing with rural Christianity, which is really an interesting topic that's being developed now. So that's one example. And along the way, we spot milestones. These are one of the important archaeological markers. So just north of Montalia here, for example, we have an excellent road section. We take groups up there to walk on this section of the Via Sebaste. And right at the top of the pass, we have an in situ Augustan milestone that tells us that it's 139 Roman miles from Pisidine Antioch. Paul would have walked right past that milestone. He'd have seen that, and he would have turned to Barnabas and said, we still got a ways to go, buddy.
Wow.
Great. Yeah, well, now, so you're walking along these roads, and probably not walking. In some way, you're navigating these roads and coming to these villages. Are there times where you might have seen, or you do see, some sort of evidence that Christianity has been here?
We do, especially in the route between Lystra and Derbe. There's been some new publications about all the various funerary monuments, especially that come from this region, with, for example, the name Paulus. So Paul's name becomes adopted very much in some of these monuments and indicate we have very early Christian communities in these rural areas that's south of the modern city of Konya or ancient Iconium. And I mean, there's one that's just sitting in the field, right, right along the highway that we have there. And in the museum in Konya, one of the most incredible sarcophagi that we have around is a Christian one, probably dating to the early 200s, that has an anchor cross at the top of it, and then it has the image of Jonah and the fish at the bottom. And so,
Wow.
Jonah and the fish, going back to what Jesus is talking about as a sign of resurrection,
Yeah.
there is depicted on this very early sarcophagus. So one of the earliest that we have anywhere in the world, really.
Wow. Wow. Fascinating. Yeah, you don't often think about how important funerary inscriptions are or might be to understanding where Christianity has been.
No.
Yeah.
Of course, these are important indicators for our Jewish communities that were here very early too. And as we, look to Paul and his family, how they ended up in Tarsus. And so that's been one of my real interests with archaeology and epigraphy related to Jewish communities. We read about synagogues in the New Testament, but we have no archaeological evidence until we're getting into the 3rd or 4th century. So, we've got 3 synagogues that have been found here. Of course, the very large one at Sardis, one in Priene, which I had the privilege of working with the Germans on, doing the excavation at the synagogue in Priene, which is just north of Miletus, give people an idea where it is in the geography area. And then just down the coast near Myra, at the port of Andriaca, they've discovered another wonderful synagogue. So we've got 3 synagogues, although they date late. They obviously have been used continuously for centuries by Jewish communities in these places.
Yeah, and it's interesting, at least from my perspective, it's interesting that the one in Sardis, I mean, you can really see that it's a synagogue. The one in Priene, it seems like it was a house at one point that was converted, or how do you understand that one?
Yes, absolutely. It's a converted Hellenistic pro-style house, and then they transformed it into a sacred space. They put a niche on the eastern wall. On one of the doorposts there, they engraved a menorah to let people know they're entering into Jewish sacred space. And so we rediscovered, I should say, the menorah plaque that was a part of that as well. And so, it's very close, just to the agora, the central part of the city there. So again, as in Sardis, indicating the Jewish communities were very influential and wealthy in these Greco-Roman cities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting too that it was a house, and you think, of course, about the significance of the house in Christianity, but it's not only in Christianity. I mean, people's homes sometimes were places of worship, pagan worship even, right?
Yeah, they all had, altars typically in their own homes. If you go to the terrace houses, for example, in Ephesus, which is just a wonderful additional visit, you got a look at what some of these homes were like of the rich and famous, of Ephesus at that time. They have elaborate dining rooms, a triclinium there for banquets, and then in one of them, it's an area where the man of the house, the patron, would welcome slaves and freedmen and whatnot. And then in the back of that, there's a niche going through there. They think that it was used for mystery cult worship inside the house there of this very wealthy individual.
Is this the let's see, I want to say dwelling unit 6, that large apsidal hall?
Right, when you first come in, yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting, that inscription. I was looking at that not too long ago, and the allusion to Aphrodite is compelling there as well, and it makes you wonder if that might have been a place of even some sort of ritual or worship of Aphrodite.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well. Well, great, Mark. Well, this has been fantastic. Hey, let me ask, inevitably, I don't think this is just for older people, in that we get interested in archaeology when we get older, but hopefully there will be some young people who are listening to the podcast. What encouragement would you give to them if someone says, you know what, I would love to get into archaeology? What would be a good first step for them?
Well, the first good step, I think, would be doing a undergraduate degree in ancient history, studying ancient languages, beginning it there, and even doing a program in biblical studies. Obviously, if you do it working in Old Testament, you're going to be looking at Israel and lands to the east. New Testament would be, working with Greek. And then even Latin if you're going to be involved in Italy. But getting this solid background in classical literature, ancient history, and then continuing on to doing this. There's some excellent programs at universities now. Good friends teaching at Lipscomb University, for example, that have an excellent archaeology program. With my friend Tom Davis and others who are there teaching. And then, of course, some public universities. But, the big issue, as you well know now in American public education, is that humanities and liberal arts programs, the money is being cut for these. And many of the senior professors are retiring in these programs like archaeology. And the chairs and positions aren't being filled again because we have so few students enrolling in these programs. And so this is one of the big issues that we have now.
So it sounds like you're saying go to England to continue to pursue your degree here. That's what it sounded like you said.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, we have good programs there, but as you well know, American education is so expensive, and you got to rack up an incredible student loan to get a degree. It just hampers you then for actually getting out into the field and doing what you've been called to do. So, even from a missiological perspective, that's a challenge too that I've seen well over the years. But the Europeans, of course, and their universities still have excellent archaeology, ancient history programs, and if you can get into one of their programs, basically it's free of charge. Mm-hmm. So that's something for them to consider too. But that's the beginning, is getting the credentials, the training, and then get over and do it. So
great word of encouragement for those who might be interested in this discipline.
For example. Excuse me, Andrew, but I was going to mention we have a State Department program over here funded called the American Research Institute in Turkey, and they've got a center in Ankara. So I was just listening to one of their podcasts on Roman Gordian last night, and they'll have a seminar coming up. So a lot of these now are being recorded, and you can get on as well. The other big program here is the British Institute at Ankara. And so they have a lot of archaeological programs. And so, you can get onto these webinars and podcasts and, get a taste of what's going on here and really get some excellent information from top-notch historians and archaeologists.
Yeah. Great.
Okay. Well, if anybody has been interested in some of the things that you were talking about, the things that are in Antalya or Ankara, or specifically the Asia Minor Research Center, how can people follow you and the work that you are continuing to do?
Well, my email address is just markwilson@sevenchurches.org, and I get emails on a regular basis, people asking me questions. They want help organizing a tour or the personal itinerary to come over here, and I'm available. I encourage people to pick up my book, Biblical Turkey, and that's obtainable online through my publisher in Turkey through Zero Books Online. And they'll be sent directly from there at a price lower than Amazon. That's the latest edition. Mm-hmm. And You can read other articles. I contributed to the Acts and Revelation sections for the ESV Archaeology Bible. So that's another area. And then an excellent resource is the Lexham Geographic Commentary. And so I contributed a number of articles, a number with other colleagues who are working in the area of geography and archaeology.
Well, that is incredible. Dr. Wilson, thank you so much. It really was an honor to have you on the podcast today. And then to you, our listener, thank you for spending your time with us too. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please check out the rest in this series, Archaeology Meets Missiology. We also invite you to go check out the rest of our online catalog. We have a lot of podcasts, and we certainly think they will be a blessing to you. And at least to what Mark said, yes, education is expensive. Might we suggest to you to go to masterclasses.ephesiology.com and see what a potential degree with missiological focus could be. Go there, take a look. We would love to help encourage you in what God is leading you towards. So for Michael, Mark, and myself, thanks for doing theology and community with us today on the Ephesiology Podcast.